guest on today's episode is Rikka Brandon. Not only is she truly just one of my dearest favorite people, but she's, by all accounts, a pretty badass business owner. And she happens to have her entire professional background, over 2 decades worth of experience, is in recruiting. And so today we are talking about the extreme challenge that everybody is facing right now that has a business, and that's recruiting good people to work in our different businesses. And so I'm really excited to have her join us because the truth is she and I talk a lot about these things. I tend to focus on the retention side of the coin, and her skill set really is about how to get the right people. But we have a great dialogue about the fact that really those two topics are two sides of the same coin. And in all, it's about workforce development, workforce, attraction, and then keeping them once they're here. And so she offers some wonderful tips to help shift the way that we could maybe tackle this problem, because all signs point to this problem not going away anytime soon. And so if we're not able to actually change the situation, then we have to change our response to it. And so that is my fervent hope in listening to this, that if you are struggling to hire people or retain good people, that the advice that Rikka offers can be something that you can act on quickly. So per usual, get out your pen and paper, friends. There's a lot of good wisdom that she drops in typical Rikka fashion. There's just no bullshit. She shoots it straight, and she wants people to win. So without further ado, learn away from my good friend, Rikka Brandon.
Well, welcome, my good friend, Rikka Brandon, to the Growing Small Town Show.
Yay! So happy to be here.
Yes, so you've been to my fair city, and you had lots to say about how much you enjoyed being here and stuff. So some people that are listening to this, I feel like they already know you. Yeah. You know, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, it's just like, well, that's Rikka. You know Rikka, right? Like that's pretty much how I talk about you. So super excited to have you on. And why don't you tell our fair listeners just a bit about, so we're talking today about rural recruiting, and the workforce situation is challenging. We'll put it that way. And I think you're a person, obviously, you're from a small town, which, that's got my heart there. You've been working in recruiting forever. So if you could tell us just a bit about like what your background is and kind of what your focus is now, and then I'm gonna give us all the hard-hitting wisdom, friend. That's what you're here to do.
I love it. Okay. Yes. So yeah, I grew up in Mayfield, Portland, North Dakota, on a farm 12 miles out of Portland. So if you ask me, I'll say I'm from Portland, and then quickly clarify it's not Oregon or Maine.
It's the North Dakota Portland.
That's right. The center of the world, I'm pretty sure. So yes, I am 58274 proud. But I grew up in a small town. I credit a ton of my business success with the lessons learned being a small town kid, and all of the, the things that drive you crazy as a teenager, that your parents find out everything immediately. It turned out to be like the best training for being successful in business. So super grateful to my roots, super grateful that my brother was much better suited to farm. So that wasn't my path. And we're all happy that the family farm continues on, because it wouldn't have if I had been in charge. So with that, I graduated college and I became a recruiter. And at the time, I honestly didn't know what a headhunter was. I just was like, this job sounds so cool. I'm going to help companies find people with really specific skills. And I loved it. I fell in love with the profession. I love talking to people about new opportunities. I love helping companies see what's amazing about them, because sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees, right? And it's hard to tell your own story because you live in it every day. And that's one of the things I think is truly one of my gifts is I can see what's amazing about your organization in a way that most people can't. And I can articulate it in a way that resonates with your ideal hires. And that's really been the vein throughout my career, is really helping companies find, connect, engage, and ultimately hire great people. And so as an executive recruiter or a headhunter, I was essentially a hired gun. Company said, hey, we need this very specific skill set and we want you to go find it. And so I did that for 2 decades across the United States, a little bit internationally, but heavily in the United States, with a focus on people who were individual contributors who were driving top line sales growth or improving bottom line profitability. So real heavy sales and management focus. In 2021, I really thought, you know what, it's getting harder and harder to hire. And as an entrepreneur, so I started my first company in 2003. So just shy of a couple decades of the world of entrepreneurship. I just thought I want to help small businesses hire better. And I know a lot of tricks and I know how to do things that are really cost effective, but wildly effective. And so with that, we started Recruit, Retain, Rock, which is a business that really is designed to empower small business owners and leaders into really finding, hiring, and keeping the people they need to power their dream. So it's something super near and dear to my heart. A lot of my time as an executive recruiter was in the building product space, which is heavy on manufacturing and distribution. So just kind of to give you a little scope of my background, I actually moved back to a small town. So I now live in a town called Battle Lake, Minnesota, which has just under 900 population. So I'm back in the small town. This one doesn't have a stoplight. Before I was from the big small town, because maybe you'll have a stoplight. So that's
we have one.
Yeah,
one
that's
stoplight.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. Like my son just said, he's like, "Is there even a stoplight in this town?" I'm like, "There's not."
There is not. No,
crazy. But yeah, so anyway, I have a big heart for small towns and particularly rural, just because it's where I grew up. So I also think that helps me understand a lot of the challenges that a lot of the online things, they don't work as well if there's only, 1,000 or 2,000 people in your community. So I'm excited to talk to Rebecca about some other ways to tackle that and give you ideas you might not have thought of yet.
Yeah. So with that incredible background, I mean, and I think I'm going to be honest, you're my good friend, right? So people like, I don't even know how I'm going to intro you, like whatever, like I haven't introed you yet. Everyone else has heard it already. So I'm sure it was great. Yeah. You guys already know who she is, but you're my good friend. And when you made this choice to switch to small businesses, I was just like, holy, like she's doing it. But I'm so excited for everybody that's going to benefit from it, because it really is. Okay. So again, you know this, and for our listeners' benefit, I'm coming at this particular conversation with you from the standpoint of economic development in our small town. Growing small towns is a piece of that. I mean, it is, but we, as economic developers, one of our jobs is to support existing businesses, right? And hands down, right now, workforce is the challenge. So what do you think our rural employers need to rethink? I was going to say are getting wrong. I was going to say are getting wrong, but that it's not that they're getting it wrong. It's that we don't know what we don't know. So what do we need to think differently about to potentially bring about some different avenues or options on the workforce development side when we're trying to recruit and find people?
Rethink is exactly the right word. What I would say is that, unfortunately, there is no blanket do this and it solves everything.
Right.
That isn't reality. It isn't your business, any part of it. And recruiting and retention are exactly the same. And I would say they're two sides of the same coin. And truly, retention starts in the recruiting stage, and retention practices lead to recruiting success. So they are very closely entwined. And I would say this, if I was advising a company, I would say, like, do you have a retention problem or do you have a recruiting problem? Because the reality is, if you're turning over 30, 40, 50, 60% of your workforce, you have a very expensive, although the cost can be a little bit invisible, retention problem. And that is, I would recommend, like, let's fill the holes in your bucket before we try to put more water in and just have it rush out again. So that's something that is a little bit, there's a big challenge if we can't find people, we can't find people. But I would say the first thing I would really encourage you to look at is, how are you keeping the people you have? Because it's better to keep them, it's better to develop them, it's better to grow them. Now, of course, if they're terrible and, not a good employee, then it's better to let them go. But assuming they are performing at the level you need, making sure you're making some efforts to keep them. It's just like customers, right? It's cheaper and easier to keep existing employees than it is to attract, train, and keep new ones. So that would be the first thing I would say, like, make sure that you're looking in-house.
Yeah, I was going to say, and let's pause right there, because I think this is really important, because they do, so it's funny. So we might as well just say it, like, for the benefit of our listeners here. Like, you and I have talked so much about your recruiting mindset, and I'm a retention mindset. My whole career has been in how do we grow the people we already have, right? And growing small towns is growing our own is one of our 6 values. So it's pretty clear that, like, but I totally agree.
Rebecca probably, like, teared up when she heard me say that. She's like, my God,
it's so great. But they are two sides of the same coin, because, like, you can recruit the best, but if you have nothing in place, like no good systems, or even, like, we got to dive into this a little bit deeper, because I think sometimes if we lose people, like, if that happens a lot, like there's a couple businesses in town I can think of. I sure as heck am not going to call them out or anything, but they seem to just have a revolving door of people, right? I think that it's easy to dismiss that as we're just not finding the right people. So can you just give some high level thoughts about what kinds of things could or should be in place? Like, what should we be looking at? Like, if people are walking out, because I'll tell you what I think it is a lot of times is we have very poor onboarding processes. I think a lot of times we don't help just really guide that person through those first 2 weeks and then that first month. And there's also very rarely clear expectations around whether or not they're meeting the mark for us. And it's hard because it's like, but your job is just, I don't know, pick a thing that feels kind of entry level or frontline oriented, right? We tend to say it was pretty simple. But I think we underestimate how clear we have to be, because unclear is unkind.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think people forget. And I mean, I've been an owner. I was an employee for 3 years and I've been an owner for 17. So my heart lies with the owner. Just so like when I come at stuff, I'm coming at it from that side of the desk for the most part, right? Which is a different perspective than many people have in the world. The first thing I would say, and this goes back to my heart is recruiting, right? Scarcity is a real thing. Finding and hiring great people is extremely challenging right now. And frankly, I don't think that's changing in the near future. So we're going to have to think about it a little bit differently and try a little bit harder and be creative and curious. Yep. But the first thing is, if you are desperate, you're going to settle for the best that applied. And if you would never use the word best to describe them in any other way other than they're the best that applied, like, of course, you're going to have a retention problem. You're going to hire people that don't fit. The reality is, yes, if you know that, like, we're essentially hiring people that can fog a mirror, which I have a client, she's like, we're literally hiring people if they can fog a mirror. I'm like, well, I'm not surprised that lots of them are not lasting till 90 days, right?
Can I just say I've never heard that phrase. I've heard has a pulse, but I've never heard fog a mirror, and I'm totally writing it down because I think it's delightful.
I thought it resonated with me too. I hadn't heard it before either. And
their pulse could even be weak, but can they breathe hard enough to fog a mirror? They're in.
Exactly, right? We want them to be able to stand all day. And so I think one, you need to really check that, right? Because it's really, it's hard to talk yourself into investing the time, energy, and money into retaining people who you're underwhelmed with, right? So I understand and appreciate that if scarcity has led you to build a team that is underwhelming to you and is not performing and is cutting into your profits, it's really hard to think about investing in them to get them up to par, right?
Totally, right.
So I want to own that and recognize that in the owner and executive viewpoint. That being said, these are things that we have choices where we got to kind of pick our battles and, block and tackle, for lack of a better term.
You used a sports analogy.
I did. Did I use it correctly? I mean, that's a real crapshoot. I'm not good at that stuff. So with that, I would say if you know that you've done that, if you know scarcity has led to making poor hires because you're just desperate, you do want to think hard about the recruiting side of it, because at the end of the day, we don't want to hire below average and work really hard to keep them. That's not how we have success, right? That being said, when we're hiring people, even if it is with a scarcity mindset, that might be your reality. Most of you are not in populations with, let alone 15,000 people to choose from, right? So you might need to figure out, how do I make my talent pool work? And what Rebecca said is exactly right. We need to make it easy, and as simple isn't easy, right? We all know that. Anybody, okay, so I know I'm not the only one who got like a recipe card from my aunt, and it's like sliced potatoes, put in pan, cover with cream, bake at 350. And I'm like, how many potatoes?
Yeah.
Like, how much cream? How long do I bake it for? There is critical stuff. But in her mind, that's everything I needed to know. The first time I made scalloped potatoes, it boiled over, made a terrible mess in my oven. It was off, but it's like, they didn't intend to set me up to fail, but they did. And so that is what happened.
That's a great example, Rikka. A great example. It's just really clear metaphor, right? And it isn't.
And I go through it myself, right? I am a big thinker. I'm a visionary. Details are not my friend, right? I hire people to help with that because it's just not my jam. But I will say this. What I have learned, and I think is really important, because as an owner or manager, we can get a little jaded. We can get frustrated. People don't care. They don't care about showing up. They're not trying. Mm-hmm. But we are giving attention to the squeaky wheel and not the one who is there trying to succeed, but is floundering. And so that part, I think what we need to remember always is, when people start a new job, the vast majority of them want to impress you. They want to do a good job. And when they aren't sure what that looks like, it's paralyzing. Right? Yep. Because they want to do a good job, but they don't exactly know what that is. So we're kind of, hamstringing ourselves because we don't actually set clear expectations. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that can be challenging, but when you're thinking about setting people up to succeed, they need to know at least like, what is kind of my core focus? What am I working towards? Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, I think this is really important because it's also recognizing, you and I talked about this before we hit record, that like, okay, so, and I still do consulting. I talk to leaders about this all the time, and it's regardless or irrespective of personal preferences, there are just some good rules of thumb. And so we've all got to figure out how to overcome our own natural weaknesses. If it's a weakness that we have that makes this part of what we do not so successful. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, so I get leaders that'll say like, well, I'm just really hands off. Well, and I say, okay, but when do you get to be hands off? Mm-hmm. You've got to think about who you're hiring. You've got to think about the level at which you're hiring. And we don't get to just, certain jobs we shouldn't expect complete self-direction and self-motivation, right? I mean, there are certain roles that shouldn't be the expectation. And just because we'd prefer to lead that way, we're setting that person up to fail, and ourselves, because then we got to friggin' hire somebody new. Yeah. Right.
I mean, I say that as a person who would like to be hands off, right? Like my heart goes out to those managers who are like, I hire them to do it. Right. Right. Yes, 100%. My heart is with you. The reality is it's unbelievably emotionally exhausting. It's expensive. It's time consuming. And the reality is when we don't know what we need people to do, and even on some high level, I'm not saying you need to have every minute of their day planned out. That like would borderline, crush me. I would never move forward if it was that was required. But we need that to move forward because we need to be able to explain and identify, are they doing it? And my wise friend, Rebecca, once said to me years and years ago, we really have two problems if somebody's not performing. It's a quantity problem, like they're not doing enough of the required activity, or we have a quality problem. They're not doing it well enough. And both of those are things we can train and coach to, but we need to understand it. And it has guided a lot of my leadership and management ever since she said it, because it's so simple. And I like simple and accessible.
Well, thank you for reminding me of that. That was quite intuitive of me and smart. Man,
but I think
sometimes
it sells it down to the matter.
Right, because that's just it. Is it that people don't know what they're supposed to be doing, or they don't know how to successfully do what you've asked them to do? That's the crux of performance.
Yeah. And
right?
I would just say this as part of this, for those of you who are listening and kind of like checking out right now, because clarity and setting expectations is a little bit boring and hard, and you're not sure how to do it, you're somewhat checking out. It doesn't have to be that hard. And here's the trade. Spending a little time before you hire to get clear about that is so much better than having an employee who's underperforming, but, oh, crud, I didn't set up any expectations. There is nothing to talk about. Like, so I just feel like they're underperforming, but I don't actually have anything that we can address and talk to. And especially in small towns, like you just end up keeping them forever because you don't know how to let them go. You don't know how to have the difficult conversation and give them a chance to thrive or give them a chance to leave. Right. And most of the time when people aren't performing, like it weighs on us. I mean, I have a free training called Reframing Firing because it's such a part. And especially in small towns, it's just 10x because you're worried what people are going to say, what they're going to think. And the reality is we liked them enough to hire them. We should like them enough to let them go and have a job or a career that they're going to thrive in. But we need to set ourselves up so we can easily have those conversations without feeling like a jerk and knowing that we're setting them up to succeed, or else helping them recognize like, hey, this isn't going to be the path where you're going to love life. And we work too much. Life's too short not to like it.
Right.
So anyways, I would just say, if you're not interested in clarity, be interested in avoiding that god awful period of time where like, that they're not performing, but you're not sure how to address it because you weren't clear about anything.
Right. So I always say, like, you coach them up or you coach them out. We're always coaching people in one direction or another. And if in absence of those kind of regular conversations, that's where everybody lives with just a lot of chaos and a lot of unhappiness.
And you're accidentally coaching them out. Like, the unintended consequence of that is that, right now I will say, if you read about the Great Resignation, and if you, part of my life is I've talked to many people who are ready to quit. So I have a very good idea about why people choose to leave. But right now, the most constant thing is I don't feel heard or valued. So like, if your employees are telling you that they're stressed out and overworked, and you're saying, okay, we're going to fix that, but then nothing actually visibly happens to fix it. Like, you're just like, they're losing confidence. right? And sometimes they're trying to gut it out. But anyway, I just think part of that is like, if you're not actually being involved in that development and those conversations, like you are accidentally harming yourself without realizing it.
Right. So we're touching a bit or kind of tiptoeing into culture.
Yeah.
So what say you, my recruiting friend, about the value of culture on either side of this coin? Because again, it is the same. Workforce development is getting them to you and then keeping them with you, getting them and keeping them. It's all the same thing. So what is culture, and if you have any like high level, and there's nothing quick about building good culture. Let me just say that. But like, just
unless you're a team of one and then you just pick it, right?
Right. And you're like, what I do, I set the tone around here. Thank you very much. But are there any high level things that even people could start to think about? Because, we're coming up the end of the year. Hopefully people will take some of this and approach 2022, like with, I don't know, maybe a renewed sense of like, I really need to do something about this kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm going to actually quote my friend Rebecca again here. Rebecca may or may not remember this either, but for a long time, I had a really jaded attitude about vision and mission. I just thought people put them on the wall, they put them in a book, they don't live them. It's all BS for the lack of a better term. And I really quite jaded. I'm not going to lie. And Rebecca.
You were a straight up asshole about it, Rikka. Come on now.
I wasn't sure where we were on the swears.
You can say it like it is. You were an asshole. I love you. I'm kidding.
It's it's true. It's like all BS. I'm like, this is what I see. And like they don't practice it. It's baloney, right? Like, I don't care. Like, and so that's a huge part of culture, right? And so I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is they come up with some vision, somewhat in a vacuum, they come up with a mission, and it's like really exciting for that 2-day retreat or half-day retreat or whatever. And then like by 30 days, it's completely watered down and not part of their life. And it's, and culture forms itself. Like you have a culture, you have an employer brand, you have these things regardless of if you've thought about them for 1 minute or not. They form organically, and it's so much better if you can form them intentionally, but they're formed regardless. If you don't think you have a culture or you don't think you have an employer brand, you're incorrect. Unless it's literally you as the only employee.
See, can we pause there for a second? I don't want to interrupt your thoughts because I know, but we'll get back to it. But that's the thing that I don't think people take seriously at all, is that your culture will form in the absence of definition. Yep. Like if you don't say this is who we are and this is what we're about, you're still going to be something and be about something, but it's going to be something you didn't drive. So that is why I think that mission, vision, values conversation, like who are you? What are you about? What should people expect when they both come to work for you and when they walk into your store, your shop, your whatever, What do you want people to feel when they interact with you? These things sound so fluffy. And I understand, this is why you and I had this conversation so long ago, but I remember it was completely around this conversation of like, I remember with you specifically, it was like, do you value speed? Yep. Like you value people that can roll quickly with you, and you had hired people that like needed a lot of time, and you had never just clearly said like, I value speed. Like there's nothing wrong with valuing anything if you're driving the ship of your business, right? You just have to be honest about what those things are.
You'll like where this story goes, Rebecca. So Rebecca said to me, like core values. I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, that's total bullshit. Exactly, like speed of execution. Like you don't like it when people are slow, like closest to the money. Don't organize your Google Drive if you have a client you can serve. This, like do the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable. Like it doesn't mean the customer's always right, but we always do the right thing because like I want to sleep at night and I worry about, again, that small town upbringing, right?
Right.
So Rebecca helped me identify my core values and help me connect them on a thing that actually mattered to me. Like, because it's like, if you're struggling to perform your duties, but you are demonstrating these core values, like I believe you're worth investing in still, right? Like that to me is like, and I'm big into assessments and I'm very resourceful. Like I'm not going to put more energy and effort into developing you as an employee than you are putting into yourself. Like that, I'm not going to spend more time and energy and effort on you than you're willing to spend on yourself. Like, so I have some, I'm a capitalist. I've been a commission person most of my life. Like I expect things from people, right? It's an investment. There should be an ROI. So that shows up for me. But the other thing that's a little different is I hire people for roles that they're not really easy to identify by 30 days if they're hitting it, right? It's usually a much more complex sale.
Right.
We've got a lot of learning to do before we're like, hey, have you been doing X number of activities? So that it's tricky, right? When I know how important activity is to success, and I know that we can make decisions very quickly about if somebody's a fit or not. And so what I learned from Rebecca with the core values, I took a little bit further, and I honestly can't remember if it was your idea or mine or just a baby of both our ideas. But my 30-day review with my employees is a self-eval. How are you doing on our 5 core values? How do you feel like you're doing with speed of execution?
Yep.
How do you feel you're doing with confident communication? So one, I'm kind of lazy, right? So they're basically doing their review. And like, if they're way off of what I think, then we have a conversation about it. But I have found, and I've been using it for years now, that people are very spot on. And in times when it's not a good fit, and I can already tell it's not a good fit, like they're calling it out. And now we have a much easier conversation where they're like, I don't get it. And then it's like, let's talk about how we can help you get out. Like, I know you need a job, like where's their value here? But like, let's recognize this isn't a fit, because I'm down for like, we should recognize early and often to let people move on. So anyway, that is something where I think if you're hiring and you can't be like, oh, you did X amount. And really in the first 30 days, there's a huge learning curve. So that gets
totally.
tricky.
Yeah.
So that's the way that I really found that has been helpful to have the dialogue.
I love this so much, Rikka, because so I like to remind people, well, the reason values matter, how you're using them is exactly why they matter. First of all, it makes behavioral stuff objective. Yeah. Now, it's not objective because it's always subjective. I get that, but it's saying, it's almost like how I've talked to the companies I work with. It's like the values, when you present them at the interview, if this person you're trying to see if they're going to be a good fit for you, and you say, this is who we are, and this is how we roll right here. Then it's like when they come on board, it's kind of like a employment contract. It's, you don't have to sign your freaking life away, and it's not like blood signatures or anything weird and crazy, but it is saying like, this is our exchange. This is who we are. And this is who you're saying will be. So once that person comes to work with you, then every time you find yourself being frustrated, which is going to happen because it just does with employers and employees, you have a foundational set of things that are behavioral in nature, right? Some of that, it puts parameters around the stuff that otherwise is just like personality conflicts.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I was just thinking as you were talking, it's like, there's 2 facets of people's work. It's their job description, duties as assigned, like the check in the boxes.
Additional duties as assigned.
Right, always, right.
Complete utter get out of jail free card.
Exactly. It's like the actual what of their job, and the values is the how and the why of their job. And I really think we need both. And I would say, so then listening to you, I just have one other thing to say, and then I would love your thoughts on this. So as I sit here listening to you and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if every employer in my small town, if every employer in Oaks could reset their culture in this way, like let's say we start 2022 and everyone goes through this set of stuff and everybody says, okay, we're going to figure out who we are. Imagine how much easier it'll be to let somebody go if you can actually recommend one of your fellow business owners that has the kind of culture that they thrive in. I mean, that's taking it way further. Like you're doing a lot by just saying, let me help you. But in a small town, we know each other because big picture, more engaged and satisfied employees are better citizens. So for me as this, like, so again, talk high picture, like high level, this is how I think about stuff. Like I don't think about the nitty gritty, but there's a lot of it that builds, and it builds up to being a very great place to live in general. Right.
Yeah. And I think, there's so much value on it on the way to utopia, right? Like when you get clear who you are. And I will say this, like for those of you who are looking at your 2022 planning and you're interested in this, one of the easiest ways to get clear about your culture, if you haven't, and Rebecca may have more advanced trainings and ideas on this, but is to really sit down with your leadership and some of those key employees and go around the room and have each person write on a piece of paper 3 things they admire about working with each person. And you will find your core values. Like they respond promptly. They find the answer if they don't have it. They're very direct. Like you will find the heart of your company and who thrives and fits by going through that simple exercise. And you can certainly make it more advanced. but it can be a little hard to define culture. So that's an easy way for you to recognize what is already valued and appreciated within your organization. And I would encourage you to do that versus the owner sit down and think about it. Because
totally agree. Yeah, totally agree.
So that's just a simple thing where if you're going to look at that culture, but yeah, to what Rebecca's saying is like, one, it makes it's easier for people to self-select in and out. So like you might have less of the conversations because they're going to recognize like, hey, this isn't my vibe. And this is, or you're never going to hire it. Now, the rub is, you want to be a place that is able to attract and engage. And I say all the time, and this is, I think, extremely true in small towns. Like it's true everywhere, but I think it is because of how tight the community is. There is, we're a God family country kind of culture, or we're a work hard, play hard culture, or we are, we have a real strong faith base. So there's different things, and people are going to be attracted and excited by that, right? There's people who want to be in a non-denominational. They're not talking about religion at all at work. That isn't something they feel is appropriate to mix with business. And there's other people that they want that to be a big part of it. And so by really owning who you are and how you show up, like you're creating a path for people to see like, hey, that's for me. Like that's the culture. I'm connected to their values and everything. So it helps with, of course it helps with retention, but it also helps with recruiting, and it helps with helping people self-select in when they see your job posting and self-select out when they see the job posting, or if they get into the interview and it becomes very clear, like, yeah, this isn't, some people don't want to be around swearing. So I swear all the time in my first interview with anyone, because I'm like, here's the deal, I swear. I'll never swear at you, but I do swear. So if that offends you or bothers you, this probably isn't going to be the right place for you.
And that's so important. And I'm telling you, like when I think about some of our businesses, I don't know how many of them really have this locked down. And you don't have to have it like crazy on lock, but you got to have somewhat of an idea. And I think, again, I get it. And people will just be like, and maybe right now everybody is just looking for someone that can fog a mirror. That might be the case. But I don't believe so.
Well, I don't for it. So here's Rikka's. We have scarcity, which scarcity leads to settling. Yep. Settling leads to setbacks. And then we're back to underperforming or turnover. Right. So we have to break the cycle at scarcity in lots of ways, because scarcity leads to settling. Like sometimes you need a body, like it's not ideal, but at the end of the day, somebody's better than nobody in some situations. It's just, getting through and trying to serve the customers the best they can, but also kind of recognizing this is the time the universe is saying like, you need to take time to work on your business, not just in it.
Right. That would be if I could give any message to our employers, all employers, is to step away from the act of doing your business and work on it, at least occasionally, because these things really matter, because we're talking about people, and to me, it is.
The reality is that owner who can't possibly, like the business can't live without them for an afternoon, a day, God forbid a week, right? You could get in an accident tomorrow.
Exactly.
And so if you don't, none of us are immune, right? Most of us don't have to think too far out into our world to realize life can happen to us and it changes everything. So be smart and take the time to think about it. Because like you might not have the chance, right? Like, and I think that's the part where it helps to get a little perspective on, I can't possibly be gone for an afternoon, or I can't be gone for a day. Well, here's the reality. Like, you could have a heart attack. Anything could happen, right? Somebody you love could get sick and your priorities shift. So make the time when you have the capacity and you can choose it, because that's what owners do and leaders do. They make things happen. They make the strategic right choice. So sorry, off my soapbox.
No. It's really good, because I feel like that's what said a lot. And I almost called it an excuse. It feels like a valid excuse for people. I understand. I really do understand it. But I also know the value of taking that time away and going through a series of exercises or whatever. Honestly, there's no shortage of information, but we're talking about something that everybody is struggling with right now. So it comes down to, well, okay, are we going to just keep struggling? Are we going to just keep doing the same thing we've always been doing and expect that something's going to change? We all know that's the definition of insanity. Like, something's got to give.
As an owner, I get it. I don't want to let my customers, all of it, I get. I think the reality is some owners are going to find the breathing room to get the space to think about culture, to think about retention, to think about development, and to think about recruiting, and they're going to win. In 5 years down the road, you may or may not be in business anymore. The ones who figured out how to prioritize it, they're going to win. I mean, I'm a recruiter, but I'm also a business owner. At the end of the day, like these challenges, they're taking out businesses left and right.
Right.
And it's a matter of time, right? And that's a negative message, except that there's so much power in it, in the fact that like you get to choose, right?
Yeah.
You get to choose that, like, I'm going to do this. And I'm not saying you should take the time off, not think about anything, kick your feet up. You might very well need that time. But I know when my business is thriving and I've oversold everything, like I'm not doing that. That isn't relaxing. I'll never relax. But, if you can convince yourself, I got to take the time to be strategic. And, depending on when this airs, like we're coming up in the holidays and there's always a little bit of space where you can make to prioritize it. So,
right.
Anyway, but I think the ultimate point is it will pay off in being able to attract better people, keep better people, and make it much easier for people to recognize like, this is where I fit. And then, hey, I want to be here for the long haul. And this is something we haven't touched on. We probably don't have time to touch on in too depth, but I think the other thing in rural markets that's easy to get forgotten is creating a career path. It doesn't have to be like a big structured management training program, but you want to show people that they have a place to grow with you. And that doesn't mean that like, if they're reporting to you and you're the owner right now, that they need to become your boss, but it means they need to be able to grow and expand in their career and in their expertise and maybe develop another division. So make sure, especially those people who've been around a long time and are key to the success of your business, like if you've been relying heavily on them in this crunch, one, you're rewarding and acknowledging it, but two, making sure you're talking to people about what they want. So you're creating it that it benefits your business and you're not losing them to somebody else across the street who can show them a picture of the future.
Okay. So we need to talk about that. Absolutely. We're going to talk about it right now because I think, so in this recent company that I was working with, we talked about all the different ways that a person could grow themselves within a position, right? There's so much more than just up the next rung on the ladder. Like you don't have to have a ladder for people to grow. There's lateral growth. People can grow their skill sets. You can let somebody, if you find out what people want to develop in themselves, like a random example would be, I don't like public speaking, right? Like I just want to get better at standing up in front of a group of people. Now that might not be super common here. I get it. But let's say that that's the thing. Well, then what could you do as their employer to help them develop that in themselves personally? Because again, people are people. They aren't just what role they play for you. They're a holistic person, mind, body, spirit, right? So if you can figure out what it is that they care about, and the only way to do that is to sit down with them and ask. But to me, this is a key part. It's a key part.
If anybody's a nerd like me who likes to check stuff out about this, upskilling is having a major trend. And I think, just as a farm kid, what the hired man role looked like in the 70s and 80s versus what that role looks like now is entirely different. I mean, technology has become a huge part of agriculture. It's just like the equipment, everything. So that's an example of upskilling that we can all relate to. Like, what it looked like back in the day versus what it has to look like now, and the comfort with technology and things like that. Upskilling is where the job you once had is somewhat being phased out. Maybe you've brought in more automation onto your floor, different things like that. But looking at that team and looking at those employees to think, what can we do? And where's there another profit center? Like, where's another way we can add revenue? We've got these great people who are proven. Like, how can we train them and empower them to do something else that, continues to make the company money, right? That's where I think there's a missed opportunity for a lot of people. There's a lot of opportunities, but that's one.
And I think up to that point too, those ideas don't just have to come from you and your leadership team. No. If you're a person, an owner that is open to the feedback, ideas, and, the thoughts that your people have, they can actually create their own career path if you're open to that, right? And if it makes sense. But I'm just saying, like, having that kind of continuous improvement mindset and wanting everybody to think like that. Like, how could we do this thing better? Or making sure that we're open to having our precious little processes questioned.
Yeah.
That's part of it too.
That's another thing. We could really go down some rabbit holes here.
I know.
One of the things I do want to touch on, just because we talked about it before, and I know that we've got a fair amount of manufacturing and distribution people listening.
Right.
So one of the things that came up a lot, like I said, I work a lot with manufacturing and distribution clients, is, how do we attract people for our hourly positions and those entry-level positions? And then how do we keep them? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So not only
can I add a tag on to that? It's how do we do it without making it like spending exorbitant amounts of money on increasing that base wage or crazy signing bonuses, right? Which are they're both tools. All of it is a tool, but oftentimes what you get is that question, how do I get them without that?
Yeah. So, I mean, you and I both know the reality is money is how people exist and live. So if you're not paying enough for somebody to have a livable wage, they're not going to choose you. They'll choose your neighbor who's going to pay them $2 more an hour. I mean, that's just like some of that is simple math, right? However, there's a lot of things you can do that go beyond money, because although compensation and wages is a very important part of the decision, it is not all of the decision. Many people, we all know people who've left because they had a bad boss, right? Or they've left because they felt they hit the ceiling. So we have options beyond that. And that's what I'm going to talk about really quick here is how do we turn our hourly or our manual labor jobs into something that is more long-term? And how do we show that path without breaking the bank or without, having to pat them on the head? One of the things that people complained a lot about millennials is like, oh, they need so much support. The reality is after the pandemic, a lot of people of many generations want that acknowledgement and support. It's important to every generation. But we're not going to talk about something like that. We're going to talk about something that's really easy to implement into your business, that's going to give you value and also give people a sense of being progressed, invested in, and valued, because it's really imperative that employees feel like you're investing in them as a person to engender that loyalty and that retention. Mm-hmm. So, it could be your first 30 days are really about, we want you to be showing up on time. We want you to be paying attention in your training. We want you to be demonstrating safe practices. Then from 30 to 90 days, we might want you to be showing that you're grasping and you're consistently executing these safely and, you're gaining efficiency. By the time somebody's been there 90 days and they have those general competencies, that might be the opportunity. And again, it's not for everyone, right? Because we want to kind of have some set things of like, you're demonstrating this. And when you demonstrate it, now you can choose. Do you want to get certified as a forklift driver? Or in lots of cases, it's people who have some driver's license, but now maybe you want to get your CDL. Of course, I have to meet all the other criteria, but it's sort of growing your own for those really painful positions and creating that opportunity. So, it could happen at 90 days for somebody who's very quick. It could happen at 6 months for somebody who took a little bit more time to get the ropes. But we want to have options that aren't hugely expensive for the company, but they benefit the company and they show an investment in the human and their ability to develop. So certified forklift driver is an easy one. You can send somebody to an afternoon inventory class. You can send somebody to an AMA management training if you're going to give them some supervisor responsibilities. But again, I don't want you to think management training, this is one of my biggest things that irritates me. It's the fact that people spend a ton of money on management development and really on average managers have 8 employees. So we're ignoring the vast majority of our employee base. By not giving any sort of individual contributor or associate level training and development and putting it all into the management training. And it literally, and again, I'm wired as an individual contributor, so part of that is my own bias. But I think there's a huge opportunity that's being missed where we don't need to give them everything and we don't need to constantly have it. But in that first year, we want them to become really feeling like we're believing in them, we're helping them develop. And then, of course, as time goes on, they'll get in the habit of creating their career path, like Rebecca talked about, and be more willing to share with you, hey, I'm super stoked about this. I love this new system, and I would love to be the one who learns it and becomes the internal expert,
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think along with that, you could build out additional monetary incentives too.
Absolutely.
I mean, so instead of paying them a hiring bonus, it could be a metric-based bonus, or a time-based bonus, like you said. But it needs to be tied back to we've hit these things. And again, you build out what works.
Share this about hiring bonuses, because I don't know that a lot of companies know this. It's kind of like relocation bonuses. Those hiring bonuses, if they're small, probably under 2,500, they might be paid all in cash. But many of those bigger ones we're seeing now, they're paid out over 3 to 5 years. So that hiring bonus isn't they're getting that hit of cash on day one.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure, because I think when you're not dealing with sophisticated hiring and recruiting practices, you might assume oh my God, how are they paying that? Most of the time it's predicated on them staying. And likewise with relocation, if you're in a position where you're going to relocate somebody, Oftentimes offering relocation assistance is really important because people aren't prepared to absorb the thousands of dollars it costs to move. Yeah. And it could result in a great person saying no. But what people typically do is they attach it to a 2-year outcome. So like, if you leave within 6 months, you pay 100% of it back,
Yep.
and it
gradually. Yep.
Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because I think it can seem really overwhelming if you just read it in the news and you don't understand how some of that is logistically handled. So.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. So what other just big takeaways? Because we covered a lot of ground, which I knew we would, and that's great. And I feel like we're for sure going to have you back and touch on more of this stuff because it's just, oh man, the people side of, okay. So I get extremely soapboxy about this. I know you do as well, but it's like, our people is what makes the difference in every facet of every organized anything. So the community, it's about the people that live here. And I can't recruit a great new person to come live in Oaks if the people that live here don't appreciate living here. Right. So, I mean, all of this, it's the same for a committee. It's the same for a church. It's the same for a school. It's all the same. So what other last minute ideas?
One of the takeaways that I'd love to leave with your listeners is, and I'm assuming most of them are owners and managers of the company. The reality is you are 100% in control. Like, especially if you're the owner, you get to choose your culture. If you look and you're like, well, it kind of sucks. Or like, we have a ton of turnover, but that's because, Bubba can be rude and he's kind of a dick, but he gets things done. Well, you have a manager who he's just gruff and you're used to him, but he has massive turnover. Like, he's a liability to your business. Find a different seat, right? Like when we think about the right seat on the bus. And I think one of the things that happens to us as owners is you start to like feel trapped by your business in some ways, like, and it's like, you feel trapped because it's not an easy fix. Like we said, we can't fix our culture in one night. We can't fix it in an afternoon, but you can fix it. You're actually entirely in control of it. And that's a really powerful position. And I think that sometimes we need that reminder, that kick in the pants of like, guess what? Hey, actually I do own it. I get to make the choices, right? And I get to drive this. And I know that I'm a good person. Like I would guess almost everybody listening donates to a bajillion causes because that is part of small business. I feel like if you're going to start a business in a small town, you should have a line item for like whatever community support is going on. I'm going to have ads. Like my son was just in a play the high school put on, and it was full of ads of all of the stores that are probably in every baseball field, every football program, everything. So all of you are living and breathing examples of great community involvement, and you're invested in your community. Most of you aren't using that as a recruiting tool, right? So I would just say, when you're putting that ad in the next playbill or you're putting it on the back of a t-shirt, you say, now hiring friendly faces or now hiring, self-starters. Think about some of those things you're already spending money on and applying it to recruiting because who's looking at that? A lot of working age people are the parents of those kids. Right. And they also, and they're also teenagers. A lot of people are looking to teenagers to help fill the workforce gap. So I think when it feels hard and when it feels like impossible, like you're in control and you can take some steps, but what really matters is it connects with you on a deep and meaningful level, right? So for me, I'm not going to be a God, family, country. That's not going to be my brand. I am way more a work smart, play hard. Like that's who I am, right? And so I think that's important for people to remember that even though it feels overwhelming, like pick something. Like even like reach out to Rebecca and just be like, where do I start? Pick something because it will all help and it'll all change.
So I love that. I think that's a perfect way to end this first installment because I know you're going to come back. But the idea of when it gets hard and overwhelming and we start to blame everything else, we become victims. And being a victim to your business is not a place or position of power. And so it's some of it's taking that back and saying, no, this is mine. I started this. And if you don't like something about it, change something. Like you said, pick one thing. You took a totally different, you chose to serve a completely different audience. And I know you're
completely different way. And it is like, it is, but my heart and my soul are in it because it aligns with what matters to me. That's why you can do big, hard things, right? That's how you started your company. I think that's how you have growing small towns, right? Like when we believe it's worth the effort, we can do anything. And that's right. The power of entrepreneurs and owners is like, we are wired to figure it out. And I think that's the thing that sometimes people forget. Like you figure out hard things, like 10 hard things
all the time. Right. You know? Exactly. Yeah. And also like that. And to me, that's more empowering than even this too shall pass, because that feels like how long, how fast, when am I going to be able, it's
not nearly enough action oriented for me.
Me neither. And I know that sometimes when you're really down and out, that's all you can really cling to. But this is one of those situations where it's like, take a beat, and instead of, I don't know, doing any other thing tonight, sit down, spend an hour with, if you're married and you have a spouse that's in your business with you, whoever your right-hand person is in that business, sit down with that person, have a drink, have a whatever, and just say, okay, everything kind of sucks right now. What can we do? Jody Bach, which is a mutual friend of ours, she shared with us the question of what if present that's missing right now would make this thing better. So like the idea of you're looking for the gap, but you're acknowledging that there might be a way to fill it. And I feel like that's a good spin on how do we make this better? Because when you're really down and out, figuring out how to make something better is entirely overwhelming. So it's like, okay, what's missing that if it were present would make this piece better?
Along that, I mean, and Jody's super wise. Like I quote her almost as much as I quote you. But I think it's, totally lost my train of thought, but it was a good one. So I hope it comes back.
It'll come back. But I think,
I know what it was.
Oh, perfect.
I know it. Here's it. Action.
Yeah.
Action. Something. Making a list. Doing something like that for me is like when I feel anxious, overwhelmed, depressed, like can't make it, like do something, right? It's like kind of different parts of our brain, right? So I think that if I get stuck in worry, I might never get out of it, right? But if I take action, even a small one. So that's what I was going to say. And also I would say this, when you talked about having to drink with your spouse, they are feeling the pain, especially if they're not in your business. Oof. They are feeling the pain of your stress, your absenteeism, like everything. They are interested in helping you solve it. Like they might be sort of surprised if you're not in the habit of asking them for advice and insight, but like give them a chance to warm up to it. Because trust me, they're interested in getting solved up, because chances are you might be bringing some crabby home. Right?
Yeah, like a whole lot of it.
Yeah.
Oh, friend, this
people want to help.
So. They do. Yeah, they do. And and your employees want to help. Like your trusted employees.
They want to help almost probably more than your spouse almost, right?
They're on the team. They're on the team. So I love this so much. Thank you so much for helping our rural business owners. I am so passionate about this, not just because I am one, but because this is the future of the success of all of our small towns, is helping small businesses thrive. And so we're going to be
creating great places for people to stay and work and thrive.
Absolutely. Right. Because again, like I said, it makes the community better when, great businesses exist here. So you're the best friend. You're going to come back soon, right?
Absolutely. Anytime you'll have me. So.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Hey, have fun, everyone. Happy hiring. It was great to be here.